Hi, I'm Rachel Wells. Welcome back to Work 2.0, the podcast. I'm your host, and I'm delighted to be back after a bit of a hiatus. I did tell you guys I've been moving house, and so everything's been hectic and crazy. So we haven't been too regular with our podcast episodes over the last few Mondays. However, as of this episode, we are back on track. I'm delighted to be interviewing Erin today, Erin Gajdalo. Did I say your name correctly?
Gajdalo, pretty close.
Gajdalo, my bad, sorry. So Erin is CEO of Pluralsight, and I'm happy to interview her today because Pluralsight just released a report. And if you know anything about Work 2.0, the podcast, we know that we love reports. We love data because that tells us where we're headed when it comes to the future of work. And so Erin, I'm so delighted to have you. She's just been almost a year in her role as CEO. So let's say congratulations on your 1-year anniversary when it comes, November. Tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, and what led you to Pluralsight, and also what Pluralsight is all about before we begin.
Yeah, so jumping right in, I have spent the majority of my career working in companies that are in the midst of transformation, and Pluralsight is certainly one of those. We see that there's a huge opportunity as tech continues to evolve and at such a rapid pace. There's a lot of work that we have to do to make sure that our customers have the tools and resources that they need in order to upskill their employees. And so just a little bit about Pluralsight overall. We are an online educational platform. Okay. We're the only platform that focuses solely on tech. So a lot of the other ed tech companies you'll see have a broader range. We focus on tech. And we really aim to be the upskilling partner for organizations. And the reason why we do this is because we believe that we bring experiences that allow them to unlock the full potential of their talent assets.
Right.
And so when we talk about some of the things that we need to do to transform as an organization, a lot of that is really driven by the speed of change that's taking place in the technology sector. And so the way that we provide that value for our customers is through a few different modes. One is expert-led content.
Okay.
Rachel, we're having this conversation because mainly because of all of the changes that are taking place as it relates to AI. AI can also create content. And so for us, we truly believe that while AI can create content and create content that's good enough, there will always be a space for expert-led content.
Of course.
For upskilling.
For sure.
And then in addition to that, there's a couple of other things that we provide. One is assessments to make sure that both employees and employers have a means in which to measure and gauge proficiency of their skill sets. And then lastly, we provide hands-on experiences. So while things like credentialing is incredibly important, will continue to have a place in the future, being able to go from really just learning the content that you have just seen to then being able to apply that and to do that in a really risk-free way that doesn't create any inherent risk for the business itself is incredibly important. So we're continuing to lean in, and as a part of our transformation, we'll continue to focus on how can we give individuals and enterprises hands-on experiences to be able to illustrate that proficiency using hands-on keyboard experiences.
That's actually amazing because there's nothing like it's kind of like degrees, people have the paper, but can they actually execute on the job? So, and that's what employers are looking for, that hands-on evidence. So you can point to that evidence if you have those practical, like a portfolio of projects and hands-on experiences, definitely to demonstrate. So let's get into this interview. And I want to talk about, obviously, your report that just come out. You mentioned about executives who say that learning culture is a priority, and we know that. But 95% of professionals, despite executives saying that, they still feel unsupported when it comes to their learning and professional development. So there's a huge disconnect here. Why do you think that is? What's causing this disconnect? And what would a truly embedded learning culture look like, where both executives and employees align on the same page and they both can see the value, they can actually see it happening in the organization?
Well, first and foremost, it's incredibly important to share and acknowledge that upskilling is hard. It is not easy to do. And the organizations that do this incredibly well are committed not only in dedicating time, but also resources into a learning culture. And what that means is not just going and buying a platform and putting it on the shelf and offering it to employees and assuming that they're going to go engage. This is all about executive adoption, making sure that everyone across an organization understands why it's so important to be able to upskill, not just for the business, but for the individual. In addition to that, you want to make sure that the programming that you have is something that is personalized and customized for the individual. And then lastly, bridging the gap to the number one challenge that we see associated with learning is creating the time and the space for that. When you're in an organization and the organizations are you have deadlines and things that you need to comply with, it makes it incredibly difficult to create the space for learning. And all of that is set based off of culture and executive adoption overall.
For sure. I know a lot of people say, you know, I don't have the time to commit to professional development because I've got so many deadlines. I've got demand, especially for managers, having demands from above, demands from stakeholders, and then demands from their direct reports. And squeezing in that time is very, very tricky. So I think it's about definitely striking that balance. And I think maybe even having those open conversations with teams about what works best for them, you know, depending on how busy they are as well. So I totally agree.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned in the report about half of IT professionals abandoning projects due to lack of tech skills. That's quite a concerning statistic, right? So if nearly half of IT and business professionals are abandoning projects midway, how does this translate to revenue impact? Because I think obviously this is being seriously underestimated.
It's really difficult to quantify the impact of failed projects. So that's point number one. However, what we do know is that the skills gap creates significant business risk. So if you just think about organizations that are struggling with outdated technology, they're going to struggle to keep up with innovation. They're going to struggle to be able to leverage modern technology to be able to drive things like revenue, or even create the efficiencies that a lot of organizations are looking to drive right now. And so that's point number one. The second point I would call out is just thinking about risk. When employees don't have up-to-date knowledge on topics such as cybersecurity or cloud computing, in the same way that we're seeing technology evolve, we're also seeing the number of cyber attacks increase. And so if your organization isn't ready and not prepared with the knowledge, it creates a significant amount of financial risk for the business. And then lastly, you know, just converting from sort of the financial implications of all of this, we talked a little bit about the culture already. And so the organizations that do this and do this really well are ones that really are driving a programmatic upskilling program. And we've seen this work really well. We have a customer by the name of Saab Technologies. Most people would know them as a car manufacturer, but they sold off that division of their business many years ago. So they focus on the defense sector, and they're a company that is based in Sweden. They started out working with Pluralsight, using Pluralsight as a way to help upskill 800 employees on cloud fundamentals. And as they completed that project, they then started to transition and are now focusing on how they're going to upskill for AI, within AI, and using autonomy to prepare for the next phase of defense technology. And that in itself, from a business perspective, has huge financial implications. But what is really showing through for them is that they're winning at the talent game. And we know this because they have employees that are consistently express that they love being there, and they love it because they have been able to create a program that takes them from learning and then applies it directly to a project. And for that reason, they've done this so well that they've been named a top 5 employer in Sweden. And so there's a lot that goes into these upskilling programs. And, you know, while some projects might fail, you have others that are big winners. And the fact of the matter is that upskilling is absolutely critical to future-proofing your business.
For sure, for sure. I think it's really important to take a long-sighted approach to this. Like, I was talking to Coursera CEO Greg Hart a few weeks ago, and he was saying 10 years time, like the most important skill will be just the ability to learn, the ability
Yes.
to adapt and learn. This is such a huge priority, to the point that it can even affect your employer brand, which is what you're saying, how employees
Absolutely.
view you as an employer. And then when they leave you, at the point they move on to another company, what do they say about you on Glassdoor once they've left? That can really impact your employer brand. If I see 3 stars, I'm not going to want to apply for a job at your company. So that's huge. That really is huge. So we're talking about AI, and I'm thinking, obviously, we're saying generative AI can create and curate learning experiences, create entire learning modules and content. Where do we draw the line when it comes to ethical boundaries? Like, should companies go all out and just produce pure learning content with AI only, and then that's it, just roll it out? What ethical boundaries do we put in place?
So there's a couple ways of thinking about this. So we could talk about ethical boundaries, but I think first and foremost, the best way, and you can leverage AI all you want in creating, personalized learning experiences, but the best way to ultimately set yourself as an individual and your organization up for success is to start with a baseline. And that's just understanding, where are you at in a specific skill level? Where am I at in my Python proficiency? Right. And in order to do that, organizations need the tools and the ways to be able to assess those skills. And so using things like assessments, as an example, we have a tool called Skill IQ. Okay. And within Skill IQ, what you can do is I can go and I can take an assessment that says, where do I lie on the level 1 proficiency for Python? Right. And I can take this test and it'll identify the specific skills gap that I have and point me to the content or to the experiences that'll help me continue to progress. And as a part of that, what you can actually start to see is you can start to see people move up the proficiency scale when this is done really well. And so while customization it's lovely, we all want to have a customized learning experience, you have to understand what your starting point is first and foremost. And so using tools like assessments to help you get there is incredibly important. The other thing I would say too also goes back to corporate culture. And when we think about learning, assessments can be a really intimidating thing. And so how organizations choose to use those as a way to create momentum and excitement for learning is so much more important than employees feeling threatened by these assessments.
Right.
And so setting the tone
exam.
From the top is Yes, exactly.
For sure. So when it comes to, so you mentioned about when it comes to personalizing the learner journey, what about when it comes to actually creating the learning content? Is there a place where there should be humans in the loop when it comes to creating it, or are we happy to just like AI all the way?
So it depends, right? So when you think about organizations that have a lot of risk as they're upskilling employees, they want to know that their content is coming from a place where their employees are going to be learning from experts. And so you can use AI for certain things, and sometimes AI is good enough. You might even go to YouTube to be able to tap into someone that might be teaching you some skill set, and that's okay. But the risk that employers carry, larger organizations carry, they're not going to place all of their chips and bets on a place where they can just say, hey, go to ChatGPT and learn how to develop this skill. It's not going to be good enough. And I will tell you, as a CEO, that would be a really difficult thing for me to think about, creating entire learning paths in just an open environment where we also know there are challenges with things like hallucinations, as an example. And so,
for sure.
Yes. So this is why I believe there will always be a place for expert-led content, and is why we will continue to lean on that as we move forward with our transformation within Pluralsight.
Amazing. So what do you think the first step is that leaders need to take towards making upskilling happen? You mentioned that upskilling delivers stronger ROI than hiring, right? If you upskill your current workforce. So what do leaders need to do today like we're in the last quarter of 2025, looking at now planning ahead for the new year 2026, what's the first step they need to take towards making that happen?
Yeah, so first step that I would say is that acknowledging that upskilling sits with the leader and with the executive team, really driving adoption. These learning programs cannot be successful if you don't have a corporate culture that really believes in learning. And so that is ultimately the first step. And as you think about leading through these types of transformations, setting the tone, what is in it for me as an employer or as an employee? Why do I want to take time out of my day to continue to evolve my skills? And creating the space for employees to do that is really incredibly important. And while we all know we're leading large organizations, we want to see the business outcomes.
Of course.
Think about the impact that you can have on an individual's life if they come to your organization and you give them the ability to grow their skills. And even if they do leave and go somewhere else, they're making a bigger impact on society by being able to continue to learn and to continue to develop those technology skills. The second point that I would say, you referenced ROI. We also talked a little bit about how difficult creating these programs are, and the jobs of people like L&D leaders is incredibly difficult. Using ROI needs to be something that starts at the initiation of a program and is really key to longevity of being able to continue to invest in learning. And the reason why I say this is because we see this every single day. Organizations that come in and want to make a large spend and are using things like engagement metrics as a way to determine whether these programs are being successful. That's not going to be the thing that truly helps you year over year justify the budget for continuing to invest in learning. So instead, the best way that you can do right by your organization and by your people is by identifying the right business metrics, things like employee productivity, or identifying the financial impact or proof of skills that people are acquiring through using these tools is critically important.
Even reducing turnover, I think that would be a good metric as well.
Absolutely. And that's
for sure.
That's a great one, because going back to our Saab example, they've done an incredible job at that. And being able to create these programs is really key.
For sure. It's very expensive to lose and then hire a new employee to take over. For sure.
Absolutely.
So I think my final question for you, and I always like to give this kind of long shot question, so I don't want to throw you too much, but if you look 10 years ahead, like I said to Greg Hart, I'm going to ask you, if you look 10 years ahead, if the traditional degree, because I talk a lot about this in my Forbes articles, where degrees are not enough. Some people, they don't even need degrees, but degrees are no longer enough. So if the traditional degree becomes irrelevant for the average tech or business role, what's going to replace it? And since we have a two-part question, what will replace it, and what should the modern, say, the learning passport contain to ensure that someone is job ready? What would someone's career ideally look like to make them job ready and future proofed?
Yeah. So I will agree with Greg's point that continuing to learn is absolutely critical. It is a major shift that we're seeing right now. So what used to be the days of you could go and get a college degree and you continue to stay in, work for an organization and use that degree for the next 20 years or 30 years, that's not the case. You constantly have to be evolving and growing those skills. But the biggest shift that I think that we're starting to see is not just associated with the universities as an example, it's really within organizations. And it's the transition from organizations thinking about, I only run my business and I do, I develop software and that's what we do. Now organizations also have to wear the hat of being an educator.
Wow.
And how are you going to start to navigate that transition in a way that you're providing really structured upskilling programs? And because it's going to help you meet the needs, not only all the cultural needs, driving retention, all of those things that we seek and want, but also the things that are going to drive productivity. We have individuals that are coming straight out of college that are super tech savvy. And then you have individuals that have been in your organization for 20 years that have incredible subject matter expertise the skills that are and now they're working on the same teams,
Right.
but they
right.
don't necessarily have the same framework for problem solving, the same skills for problem solving. And so thinking about how organizations can put on that hat of being the educator is going to help you ultimately bring these populations together and truly look at your employee population as a talent asset, helping you to achieve the strategic outcomes that you're intending to drive, all while doing what is right and in the best interest of employees around the globe.
Amazing. You know, I'm not sure if it's this way in the US, but in the UK, having an HR department or an L&D department is not mandatory. You know, right. So it's the same in the US. And so you'll have, you know, you could have a startup where, you know, the main priorities of a startup with the product department, the marketing, the sales department, business development. HR is kind of left till the end. But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like that needs to be first and foremost, just as essential as your products and go-to-market strategy, just as essential is your learning and development strategy, for sure. This is how organizations need to be thinking. So as a startup leader, a lot of people are thinking about, you know, the tech, the product, but now you're saying, you know, they need to fill dual roles of being educators as well as running the business. So I think for entrepreneurs entering this space, there really needs to be the thought about, am I willing to not just launch a nice startup that has all the, you know, the investments and everything and the shiny tech products, but behind the scenes, am I willing to invest in developing my team? If I'm not willing to do that, then I'm not going to succeed, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And the biggest barrier to that many times is investment, right? And so in the US, we see most organizations have an HR department, but what they don't necessarily have is an L&D team or even an L&D leader. And so what I would say in those cases, the best way to overcome that is to truly seek out the right partners. And that's what we find joy in what we do, is being able to partner with those organizations and really help them think through what can that upskilling journey look like and what are the things that are most applicable for your business is really core.
Wow, awesome. Erin, thank you so much for coming to this podcast episode and sharing your insights from the Pluralsight report. Where can people find the report if they want to look into it in more detail for themselves?
Yes, so you can go to pluralsight.com and we have a resources tab where you can find all of our latest research.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, for those of you who are listening or watching this episode and found it really insightful, if you had any questions, had any light bulb moments, feel free to drop a comment under the episode. Share this with your network, share it on LinkedIn, share it with your coworkers, share it on Slack, share it on Teams, wherever you and your coworkers meet. And also don't forget to follow Work 2.0, the podcast, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcasts. And give us a good rating so that we can get the word out to more people and equip everybody for the future of work. I'll see you next Monday on the next episode.